Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Success Insight podcast. Our guest today is Lurie Orlinsky. Lurie is a multi-award-winning children's book author, freelance writer, and marketing director who lives here in Chicago, the Windy City. Lurie has authored 2 books. The first is Being Small Isn't So Bad at All, published by Mascot Books in 2019. And she just published last month, as a matter of fact, The Tooth Fairy's Tummy Ache, also published by Mascot Books. Let me tell you a little bit about Lurie. She is a 5'1", and in parentheses, on a good day, with heels and big hair, writer, marketing director, and mom who lives here in the city. And she was inspired to tell the story about her own real-life experiences raising 2 little ladies. She has 2 daughters, Hayley and Ellie. And this story, especially being small, isn't so bad at all. She wishes this story was around when she was growing up. Lurie is also certified by the CDC in bullying prevention and response training and is an ambassador for the Pacers National Bullying Center. Lurie Orlinsky, welcome to the Success Insight podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Lurie, you're surviving the Chicago snowfall today. You're home and joining us. And your book and your stories being on the media is just, you've been out there. And these 2 books that you have written are striking a chord. And I think it's wonderful. So tell us, a little bit of your journey to kind of set the stage for why you decided to start working on some children's books.
Thank you so much. So I have a journalism background. I graduated from Indiana University from the Ernie Pyle School of Journalism. And it's always been just like a bucket list thing to do to publish a book, whether it be a regular, adult book or a children's book. And I've just been sitting on it for a while, and I never really had the aha moment until my daughter Hayley came home from school one day when she was 3 years old. She was in preschool and she came home in tears. She was inconsolable. And it took a lot of prying, and I asked her what was wrong. And she had explained to me that the teachers were redecorating the classroom in preschool. And one of the things they did is they hung a growth chart in the classroom. And the growth chart, they would put a marker next to everyone's height with their name on it. And all Hayley's friends' names were at the top in the middle of the growth chart. And Hayley's name was all the way at the bottom. And not only was that the first time she realized she was different from her peers and she was short, and her peers realized that she was different from them, but she felt like she was the worst because every single time she looked at that chart, she saw her name on the bottom and she associated it with being last just because we associate the top with the best. I worked with Hayley, kind of coaching her because I'm 5'1", as you mentioned, and I said, there's so many more things that small kids can do. And she just wasn't buying it. And, at that time, her teachers and her friends were innocently calling her little pet names like Shorty and Peanut. And she just didn't like it. She was really sensitive. And so, like any other good mom, I went on Amazon and I tried to find a book about short kids that I can read to her. And the ideal moment was for me to point to a child in the book and say, see, this child is short and this child thrived because of these things. And there were no books about small kids. It was like, I couldn't believe it. Not only were there not books about small kids, but there were books about superheroes precisely because they were tall. So that was my kind of aha moment. And I thought to myself, let me try and just write a book about being small. And that was how it was born. And now Hayley is the kid in the book that other kids can look to and say, she's happy with who she is and she made these choices.
First, I found it very hard to believe when I heard you say that there was no books out there to focus on a child who is short. I think I would have been as surprised as you were when you were starting to do that research. And, when I saw her, I have to say, I saw her on the WGN bit not too long ago, and she's a cute little kid. I got to tell you, I love that smile of hers.
Oh, thank you. Yes, it's a toothless smile now. She looks like a jack-o'-lantern.
Well, she's perfect for the new book,
Absolutely. We planned it very well. I just yanked out her teeth so I could release the book at the same time.
Very well. Timing is everything in this book launch business. So When you created this book, it was to address this incident and then some that took place with your daughter. And when I read in the intro, you're certified by the CDC in bullying prevention and response training. Did that come before or that come after the incident with the book?
That came kind of during the process of when I was writing the book, because initially this book was just for Hayley and this was to make her feel better. And then when I was writing it, I thought, well, maybe it could be for any parent that's in my situation that literally Googles books for short kids. And as I was writing it, I realized that you could take the word short out and you could sub it for so many things that make children feel different. You could sub it for skin color. You could sub it for sexuality, any kind of curly hair, large features, small features. I mean, short was just what worked for us. And so I started looking into bullying and I found out that 160,000 kids stay home from school every single day just to avoid being bullied. And to me, that stat was mind-blowing because I thought, if I can change the attitude of just one child, maybe it would create a ripple effect. It's unbelievable how much of a problem bullying is in our country and, in other countries as well. It really starts with these microaggressions when kids are in preschool. And of course, height is one of the first things that kids pick on because it's a visual indicator that kids are different. I really started to become involved in the bullying prevention cause during the process of writing the book.
And I also mentioned during the introduction, you are a part of the Pacers National Bullying Center. And I take that to mean the Indiana Pacers. That's the only thing that I can think that you meant. So did I get that right, though?
No, it's actually, it's part of the National Bullying Prevention Center, but I like where your line of thinking is because I love everything Indiana, but they're National Bullying Prevention Center. And on their website, they have some resources where parents could go and learn to talk to their kids about bullying. And they have some book suggestions. My book is up there. And when I do school visits and library visits, I often bring collateral from them, posters to give to the schools and libraries about bullying prevention, as well as like bookmarks for kids and things like that.
Fantastic. There's a lesson to myself. Usually I'll ask a couple clarifying questions before we start the podcast. You've just convinced me I need to not go out on a limb that I just kind of broke away from the branch.
Hey, it was a good guess.
Yeah. Well, I did notice that you were a big fan of Indiana. And so I thought, well, heck, it's got to be it. So I'm curious, in publishing the book, where does the teacher fit into this? Because, I remember growing up, and I was in high school at this time. I remember a teacher saying to me, Howard, you're never going to be a doctor. Okay, I'm never going to be a doctor. It's never happened. Though I think Dr. Fox has a really good ring to it. And kids, young adults are very impressionable from what other adults say, parents, your siblings, your grandparents, et cetera, et cetera. What role does the children's teacher play in helping to change this conversation of addressing the microaggressions that are occurring? What roles do you think the teacher is playing in this issue with the bullying?
Well, that's, first of all, why I love books, especially lesson-based books, because you're not sitting a child down and saying, we're going to read a book about bullying or you're in trouble. We're going to talk about honesty. We're going to talk about this. A teacher is reading a book and naturally it leads to a conversation about what the child faced. So they can talk about the obstacles that the child in the book faced. And one of the things that the teacher can talk about, and I also have some questions on my Facebook page, and I'm going to put those on my website too, some discussion, common core questions for teachers. But one of the things on there, teachers can ask, how did the child react from the beginning to the end? And what are some of the things that, if you went through this scenario, would you call this child Peanut? And they can even role play. And one of the things that that just shows naturally is that even though sometimes our intentions aren't malicious, our words have meaning over other people. So when Hayley's really good friends were calling her Peanut, they thought that they were being cute and sweet. And they didn't realize she was coming home every night crying and saying, I don't want to be known as Peanut. I just want to be called Hayley. So I think that books, especially lesson-based books, naturally just lead into these discussions and role-playing opportunities. I've also seen a lot of teachers with a K-3 curriculum talk about the characters in the books and the different feelings. And it's a great way to talk a bit, to get kids to open up about the topic. It's a tough topic, but in a way that doesn't feel forced.
Oh, I think that's wonderful. And are you hearing from other teachers, other educators on the impact that a book like this or other lesson-based books can have on the children in their class, or on even on their awareness of the impact that maybe, again, you said they didn't wake up to be malicious. They thought they were being cute. But do you hear from those teachers as educators on the impact that books like this are having?
Yeah, I am hearing that books like this make kids more empathetic to other, children's issues. And I make sure that I have my two daughters, I raise them to be very kind world citizens. Last year, Hayley had a new girl that just moved into her class. She was from Yemen and she didn't speak English. And Hayley noticed that Hayley would come home and tell me she feels really sad. And that's how I felt when people would pick on me. She feels sad because she's lonely. And so Hayley and I would brainstorm, well, how could you get through to her? And it was tough because there was a language barrier. And Hayley took it upon herself to start drawing pictures for her and dropping them off at her desk. And they started drawing pictures for each other. And then they became really fast friends. And this year I had found out that the girl's mom emailed the principal and asked for the child to be placed in the same class with Hayley because, Hayley really made her feel welcome and kind of changed the way that she looked at school. And so that is kind of all about kindness. And, I think saying to Hayley, you're the girl in the book, also putting her in the position of you're a role model. How could you help other kids? And it's when teachers are having some issues with bullying, I think they say, well, what about that book that we read? What were the implications? And so I think teachers can refer back to that and kids can model that behavior.
As you were just describing this story, and immediately I began to think about, Hayley, first of all, for a child, very emotionally intelligent for her age, and to be able to recognize how somebody else might be feeling and to articulate that with your help, but also becoming a role model for others for whatever reason they might be going through a challenge. In this case, this young little girl from Yemen, and just being able to acknowledge there's something going on here. What can I do to help her? And I think that's just a wonderful story of how we can help our children step up in a way to really not feel somebody be marginalized for whatever reason there is. So that's wonderful.
But I mean, we've all, especially as adults, we've all been there as children. And that's what we're trying to prevent. We don't want our children to have been there. We want to instill this empathetic quality in them early in life.
Mm-hmm. Very much. So I'm curious, as we kind of shift our conversation, being small isn't so bad at all. What were some of the positive points of being small? Can you share a couple of those?
Absolutely. It's a rhyming lesson-based book, so some of them are silly. My favorite stanza is what my mom used to tell me. Again, I was never so upset about being tiny, but there were some instances. So my favorite stanza is, you're the last one to get wet when it rains, and you get the most legroom when we fly in a plane. And those are some easy things to illustrate. I mean, when you think about it, you are the last one to get wet when it rains because the rain hits the taller kids first. And it's just a little funny anecdote that my mom used to tell me, and it just resonated with me. And same thing when we fly or if we go on the L or something. I mean, my kids always get the most legroom. They're not cramped because they're tiny. And so it's just flipping their thoughts of themselves kind of on their head and making them out to be the star. And again, you can do that with so many scenarios. It doesn't have to be short, but that is definitely my favorite one. I remember when I was a kid, the one time that I was always bothered by my height was when I used to go to an amusement park, and I was never tall enough to ride the roller coasters. And all my friends, older, younger, they would all ride it. And so my mom would do two things. One, she would put my hair in a really ridiculously high ponytail, and we would just cross our fingers and hope that they would measure from the top of the ponytail, which is exactly what I do with Hayley when we go to Great America. And she would stuff my shoes with paper towels.
Oh my, that's fantastic. So was there a particular scenario that really Hayley kind of latched down to as this book started to come into fruition, in addition to the story you just shared?
I think, there were so many scenarios that she just didn't realize that she had an advantage. And like, we always kind of complain when we go to the movies or we see a show and somebody tall sits in front of us. And so it was as simple as me saying, Hayley, people must love you. They must love to sit behind you because you give them the room to see. They could see, they have a clear view. And she was like, yeah, that makes me great. And it's just things like that. And when we talk about the summer and playing with kids and doing something like limbo, I'll tell Hayley, it's so much easier for you because you can get really low. You're closer to the ground. And it's just things like that we do that it's just that she didn't understand that she had an advantage at.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Now you have the second book. It was just released last month. So congratulations.
Thank you.
The Tooth Fairy's Tummy Ache. How did that come about?
So the book is about a little girl. So it's another lesson-based book on honesty. It's also a rhyming book. And the book is about a little girl who's named Ellie after my second daughter because I had to do something to pay honor to her, of course. And she feels really excited now. But Ellie swallows her first tooth and she is freaking out because she thinks that the tooth fairy wouldn't visit if she didn't have a tooth to take. So she ends up putting something under her pillow that's not a tooth, and all kinds of funny things start happening. And I never swallowed my tooth, but my very first tooth, I lost it. Like literally my parents threw it in the garbage. We couldn't find it. And I remember, I don't have very many memories of being like 5 years old, but I remember laying in bed thinking about like, what happens if the tooth fairy didn't come? What would that be like? Like, what could I do instead? I think I just wrote a note and said, like, I'm sorry, I lost my tooth. But I've kind of always had that imagination and the fascination with the tooth fairy. I also was raised Jewish, so I didn't grow up with Santa Claus. And so I really love to believe in the tooth fairy. And so, when I was thinking about the concept for a second book, it naturally came to me, maybe I can take this idea and blend it with honesty. And it's a really cute book because, again, you don't want to sit down to it with a child and say, we need to have a talk and we need to talk about lying. We need to talk about honesty. Kids will get defensive and upset. So this is one of those books that you can just read with them and naturally lead into the conversation about, well, what could the girl have done when she swallowed her tooth and et cetera.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
And who better to teach a lesson than the tooth fairy? I mean, kids want to listen to the tooth fairy. They're obsessed with the tooth fairy.
Of course. And there's so many ways to meet the tooth fairy. So, Lurie, with this new book, The Tooth Fairy's Tummy Ache, lots of opportunities to share this book as well and talk about the honesty. I've got to ask, have you gone into dentist office? And because there's probably a lot of teeth there, especially pediatric dentists.
Yes, dentist's office love it. They love the book for their waiting room. My childhood dentist has like 5 copies in his office next to my picture, I have to say, which I, for 36 years, have been in the No Cavity Club. So that makes me really excited.
Oh, wow.
I feel like a bit of an expert, even though my daughter, Hayley, just had 8 cavities filled at 6 years old.
8?
8. Oh yeah.
My God.
The Sour Patch Kids, those things are lethal.
Oh my. So how much promotion are you doing on the book? I mean, are you out there at book readings and schools and libraries? What are you doing that perhaps you hadn't expected when you set off to author a couple books? You got to promote it.
The dental offices are definitely a fun thing that I never thought of until the book came out. I'm going this upcoming weekend to a dental office and they're having a tooth fairy party. So they'll have the tooth fairy actually fly in to meet the kids. They will have, some cupcakes that are tooth shaped and kids can actually decorate their own tooth keepsake box. So when they lose their tooth, they can leave it for the tooth fairy in the box and they can do some letters for the tooth fairy. And so I've come up with like a lot of crafts crafts that go along with the book. So it's not just like fully discussion based. I think kids can really have fun with this book. And especially, kids at libraries love this. They love talking about it. They love doing the little crafts. It's been really fun. This book is definitely more imaginative than the first book. And so there's so many opportunities to do different kinds of crafts. And as I said, everyone loves the Tooth Fairy. So there's so much that you can do with it.
Fantastic. And your book, both books for this matter, have received a number of awards and accolades. And how is that changing you? Changing just the idea, oh, wow, this has just happened. That's just happened. Being on TV and in front of the camera, which, by the way, Hayley was a natural. She needs to get back on to those stations. She was fantastic.
I think she wants to be a broadcast journalist now. There
you go. She's gonna be a journalist, just like her mom.
Winning these, I still have to, I don't take any of these lightly. I still have to pinch myself. Being Small won the 2019 Author Academy Award for Best Children's Book. And, we talk about defining moments in our lives, the birth of your children, your marriage. That is definitely one of the defining moments in my life, because I knew that my book was good, but I didn't know if it was good enough. And then I didn't know, would it resonate with kids that aren't short? Would it resonate with kids that are tall? And I'm seeing that it's resonating with kids of all sizes, because the message really transcends so many different scenarios. And that's what gave me, I never would have written The Tooth Fairy's Tummy Ache had I not had the success with Being Small, because it gave me confidence to say that I can do this again. And, I have a third book that's in the works right now, again with Mascot Books, and I'm hoping for a release in 2021. And again, this journey has been amazing, but had it not been for that one moment where Hayley came home from school crying about her height, I don't know that I ever would have done it. And so it's really interesting the way that things work out.
Yeah, it is amazing. And what I do really find remarkable is you've touched on a topic that's still to this day in 2020. So we're going to partially date this episode of the podcast. Is bullying is such a factor in our schools today, and whether it's explicit or implicit, and we're just doing it, but we don't realize we're doing it, but it's there. And now this book, Being Small, is a way to kind of address the topic, and the fact that it, like you said, it transcends a lot of different topics of being different, whatever those might be. And I think that's what's really fascinating. So it will be very interesting to see how this journey for you continues to evolve, from that initial idea, I need to do something about this.
Thank you. And I also wanted to share, I was fortunate enough to be invited to Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago to read Being Small. And it was amazing. I had, all the children that were staying and that were able to came into the Family Life Center. I read the book, and some other kids were able to call in that weren't able to come down and ask questions. And I kept it very light, specifically because I was at Lurie. And I said, what are some things that make you different that you can relate to in the book? And I said, I'm left-handed. And I anticipated that kids would kind of follow my lead and keep it light. And one girl raised her hand, and I will never forget this. She said, I am different because I have someone else's heart in my chest. She had just gotten a heart transplant, and that's how she related to Being Small. And it was just amazing to hear, so that, that's such a big scenario that's how she found the relatability.
Wow, that's amazing and so sorely needed. And Lurie is such a wonderful place, with the great work, and just the kids they're there because they're ill, and just to be able to provide that service, back to them. Where do you see this journey taking you as an author? You've got this career in marketing, and now there's a whole other part of you besides being mom. Where do you see this work going?
I hope that in the next 5 years or so, from my mouth to God's ears, that I'm able to be a full-time writer. I love lesson-based books. I think they're so needed in the world. And I would love to be able to every day go to different schools and libraries. Right now, I really just do it on the weekends or over my lunch hour. And while I really enjoy marketing, my passion is now writing children's books. And so I have so many ideas turning in my head for new books. And so I hope that within the next few years, I'm able to do that.
Fantastic. And, I want to share my background is in coaching is we go in, I work with adults. Sometimes they're young, they're high school or college age, young adults. And many of the issues about being, anxiety or a limiting belief or being afraid to take on a challenge for whatever reason. And so many of those stories began back when they were kids, and they either came from parents, the schools, or friends. And those stories they would say about themselves or that they began to believe stuck with them during the adult age. And what I found on this podcast is we have been interviewing the book authors, and yours is right up there at the top, is this topic, this book is actually very good for adults. And, adults that are, say, starting to work in, their first job or working in a highly stressful environment, perhaps working with a supervisor, a manager who is perhaps not being as, let's just say, emotionally intelligent, collaborative, relationship-oriented as they could be. And we can feel like as adults, we're being bullied. And I love the fact that, this book is equally identifiable for an adult population. And that's the one thing I've noticed because many of these, as you call them, lesson-based books are out there, that, you probably have an entire population that your books can then go to. But I would think, though, working with little kids and having readings with them is probably a little bit more fun than adults like me.
But adults, you're right that adults do resonate with some of the concepts. And a lot of times when a librarian or a teacher is in the room, they'll talk about their own experiences as a child and how they overcame bullying or what they're doing to raise their own kids. And so I think having that relatability is great. Fantastic.
So, Lurie, if our listeners would like to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places for them to go?
My website is LurieOrlinskyAuthor.com. So it's LorliNsky author.com. I'm married into the last name Orlinsky. My maiden name was much easier. Okay. But there you can find links. My Facebook and Instagram handle are also at Lurie Orlinsky. And my books are available on Amazon. And I love talking to people about the process of writing books. And, I'm happy to sign. While you can get books on Amazon, I'm happy if people contact me and they'd like me to mail them out where I can sign them for their children or write a sweet message in it. I have a place on my Facebook page where I often highlight kids with the books. I love seeing pictures of kids with books. It makes me so happy.
Fantastic. And, speaking of pictures of kids with books, we would love, in addition to the book covers, which we'll put in our show notes on successinsightpodcast.com, but if there are pictures of you doing a book reading, perhaps maybe even like the picture that was taken on WGN, that we can include in our show notes, those go over very well with our listeners and viewers to the website. So,
absolutely. I'll send those to you right after we get off the phone.
That's fantastic. And, I have one other question. You did mention the last name Orlinsky, and your maiden name was probably a lot easier. What's the hubs think about all this? Is the wife's newfound fame?
He is a teacher. So he's a special ed teacher. He does high school right now, but he loves the fact that the books are lesson based, and he likes the fact that I turn something negative into a positive. He and my younger daughter, Ellie, sometimes feel really left out when Hayley and I do things like the news. So having Ellie in the second book is great, having her name in there. And then the third book that's coming out is going to involve kind of our whole family story.
Fantastic. Now, I am curious too, is there any pets in the house?
Yes, we have a dog named Drake. We got married at the hotel to Drake, so we named him Drake after that. People think he's named for the rapper. He's a beagle, and he's very, very, very loud, and he's wild, and he's 10. And then we have also a 10-year-old cat named Hoosier because, of course, Indiana.
Of course. Well, Lurie, thank you so much for joining us on the Success Insight podcast. It has been a pleasure to get to know more about you and your work, and sharing with us the kind of the origin story of being small. It isn't so bad after all. And again, just kind of seeing those pieces up on social media on your website and seeing Hayley. And I think one of the stories the weatherman said, "Don't worry, kid, you're going to be just fine."
He did. He said to her, "You're going to have boys banging down your door." And we got off the air and she goes, "Excuse me, I already have a boyfriend. He's been my boyfriend since kindergarten."
Okay.
So it was very funny. And she's like, "He'll be my boyfriend forever."
Wow. I think your kids are like old souls. I mean, they're very, very emotionally intelligent for young little kids. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much. And it's been an absolute pleasure to get to know more about you and your work. And thank you for taking part out of this snowy day to join us.
I'm happy to do it. Thank you so much for having me. And I will definitely follow up with the photos. And I really appreciate you taking the time. It's such an honor to be on the podcast.
There you have it, folks. We have just been chatting on the Success Insight podcast with Lurie Orlinsky. Lurie is a multi-award-winning children's book author, freelance writer, and marketing director who lives here in what is today very snowy Chicago. And Lurie is an advocate in bullying prevention and response training and ambassador for the Pacers National Bullying Center. And she joined us today to chat about two books. The first being Being Small Isn't So Bad After All, and A Tooth Fairy's Tummy Ache. You can visit Lurie on our website, LurieOlinskyAuthor.com. She's got our Facebook page, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And we will provide the backlinks in our show notes so you can learn more about Lurie and her work. And in fact, if you're even here in Chicago, I'm sure there's going to be some bookstores and libraries where she will be speaking at. In fact, if perhaps you are in a position you would like Lurie to come and speak to your organization, well, definitely reach out to her via these websites. So another fantastic children's book author. And again, it's just been an amazing experience at these books. Many of them are lesson-based books, and the stories they tell are pertinent not only for the young children who's the intended audience, but also looking at, as adults, how we are raised and who we are becoming, and perhaps those limiting beliefs that are getting in our way. And books like this can even help us adults kind of overcome some adversity we're facing in our lives. So again, I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Do visit us on successinsightpodcast.com. Leave a comment or a like regarding this or any other episode. You can also visit us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Pinterest. And remember, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there and have a phenomenal day. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Success Insight podcast. Take care now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.